Okay, so this is week 3 lecture of the neural base of consciousness. And this week, I'm going to give you an overview of the important clinical cases. Okay, so let's get started from week 2 recap. And from this week, I'll try to make each session roughly like 20 minutes and then separated by 5-minute break. Now that I finished all the administrative stuff. So the second week started with this triangulation method of the phenomenology, conscious experience, and the experimental data, brain, and behaviors, and the theory approach. And then followed by impacts of the consciousness research. And in particular, I introduced some neuroimaging research for detecting consciousness in the vegetative patients. And then a brief history of a consciousness research, going over from the neural correlates of consciousness, how the problem, and the integrated information theories. And then I also demonstrated some ways to characterize our own phenomenology, and then discussed a little bit about the pros and the cons on introspection and the reports, introspection without reports versus overt behavior reports. And then I also asked you guys to do the experience in a moment to take a closer look at what you actually experience, and using the Twins free report paradigm with briefly presented natural scene, and also I explained or demonstrated the backward masking demonstration in the last week. And then finally, I briefly covered the methods of the neural measurements that are available right now to supplement the experimental data, such as EEG and fMRI. So this week, learning objective is to understand or to try to be able to answer why are these studies of the brain region patients important in the study of consciousness research. And then try to be able to describe what it's like to become a locked-in syndrome patient or blindsided patient. And then also, what is the role of a particular brain areas, in particular cerebellum, prefrontal cortex, or posterior visual cortex for consciousness. And then in terms of the reading material, I put chapter 12 of Quest for Consciousness, which lists a bunch of interesting brain lesion patients' behavior and also experience, and where query is coming from. In chapter 2, that's the same as last week, and then also Bernard Bars's brief history of consciousness science, which goes from ancient period into the early 2000s, which is highly readable and recommended. And if you have any questions, again, post it in chat or raise a hand or speak as well. Okay, so week 3. Why are the studies of brain lesions patient important? The case studies are extremely important in consciousness research, and this may be a bit counter to some psychologists or neuroscientists who have been trained to look at many people, especially normal people, for the statistical analysis purpose. But it's actually it's arguable that the case studies are even more important in the case of the consciousness research. And one of the reasons is that phenomenologically, adult patients with lesions can report their experience verbally, and that's very unlike babies or animals or plants. And then we ourselves can become like them potentially, as I argue for that locked-in syndrome later. And what is the like questions can be potentially self-evaluated and also asked to the patient's case. And then also critical experimental data also exists in the case of the patients. They give us an idea of the constraints on the link between the brain and consciousness, which brains are important or causing what kind of deficit. That's a very important question to ask. And also, these are also something that some of your presentations in the week 2 started to talk about, which type of the brain lesions are cause what type of the phenomenological alteration. Then the theoretical constraints also exist. basically any theories of consciousness needs to explain why particular type of the brain lesion causes the loss of consciousness or not. And how we can coherently explain all the phenomenological and also experimental data are the significant constraint on the theoretical studies. So if you look at most of the papers that we review in the tutorial, it tends to have a strong emphasis on the normal people in psychophysics or neuroimaging in normal people. But before like the advent of the functional neuroimaging around 75, 85, and so on, most of the knowledge in consciousness studies of brain science actually came from the brain stimulation and also brain lesion. And they are still continue to be important, and the stimulations is even more important. But brain lesion studies are a bit less compared to other modality, but it still plays a very important role. So, for example, you might have heard of this person called Phineas Gage at the beginning of the century. Got the pole, going through the head through from the below the eye, and then went into the skull and the frontal areas of the brain, and then went out from the top of the head. But still, he recovered quite a bit, and then became conscious and so on. And we now know that probably this part of the brain is not required for you to be conscious in various modalities. And in the case of the Locked-in syndrome, if you have a significant lesions in the brainstem around here, then you potentially with traffic accidents, in fact, then you become completely motionless, and all the things that you can do is to blink, but still you might be conscious. And this is a particularly striking kind of the patients who doesn't have a part of the frontal areas, like here. This is a nose, and then this is the eye. So you can see that the frontal part of the brain is missing here. And then this is a patient who doesn't have a cerebellum, which we'll discuss later today. This is nose, and then this is eyes. So you see that the back of the brain here is missing. And these patients, interestingly, do not seem to have any appreciable difference in terms of consciousness. And why are they like that? That's a very interesting question and important question to address. So some of you guys have actually made a very nice presentation on the week 2 tutorials on the review of the theories of consciousness. And you don't need to go into the detail at this stage, but there are 4 types of the theories that was reviewed in this paper, like higher order theory, saying that the consciousness exists when the higher area, like prefrontal cortex, monitors the occipital cortex. On the other hand, the integrated information theory says that when there is a significant chunk of the cortical hot zone, then that is sufficient for consciousness, depending on the type of the connectivity and so on. And the other type of the theory also makes some prediction about which particular area of the brains are important for consciousness or not. So to test or to evaluate these theories, these clinical cases are also important. So in summary of the first part of the lecture, brain lesion patients provide critical data to think about what consciousness is and is not and can be, depending on the lesions. And they set the stage for the phenomenology brain link, and any theories of consciousness has to explain that. And so, with this, we can define our question of a mind-body problem into the consciousness brain problem. And we'll next look into the more details of these types of lesion. So far, is there any question up to here? Maybe this is still introductory material, so not so much. Okay, let's move on. So what it is like to become a locked-in patient. Here is a couple of interesting movie trailer. Can you? Maybe I'll change to. Quite interesting movie that you can actually watch on the website if you're interested. And this is a quite compelling movie as well. So here's I think it's still probably it seems like it's not working anymore. I'll try to find the link if there's any still living link in the future. But so this movie shows the real person who had a significant injury because of the traffic accident, who basically lost all the control. And then this is a nurse who tried to help him to recover. And then basically the most striking part of that, movie is for this guy who used to be like a editor of the Elle magazine, to learn how to communicate with these people through the number of the blinks. You can imagine that you can stop blinking once to express A, and then blinking twice as B, or when actually, sorry, the nurse read up the list of the letters, and then the patient needs to blink at the time when he want to choose that particular alphabet. So if you want to say, let's say love, L-O-V-E, then as the nurse reads up, a letter from A, B, C, D, F, G, blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes to L, then you make a blink once or twice. And then she understands, okay, so you wanted to say L, and so on. And then remarkably, this patient was able to write the entire novel, this diving bell and the butterfly, with this way of communication. So just to type in one letter takes a couple of probably few to tens of seconds, but he does that every year one by one, and then eventually to make it like a entire novel. So you can also read this novel of the diving bell and the butterfly from the perspective of the patient who was in a locked in. So that's quite compelling kind of evidence to say that the completely immobile person from outside is still significantly conscious. The locked-in syndrome is categorized as here in this figure. This is a sort of updated version of the famous figure from Stephen Laureus on the level of consciousness versus contents of consciousness. But in this case, the x-axis is the sort of behavior, wake-like behavior, and then y-axis is the actual level or contents of consciousness that the patient is likely to be experiencing. So locked-in syndrome is almost like as a rich conscious experience in this y-axis, as well as the sort of the behavioral states in terms of eyes open and so on, but they cannot move their hands or a foot or whatever, except for the eye movement and also potentially blinks. And what causes this type of the deficit is remarkably small parts of the brainstem. So even if your entire cortical areas, as well as also the cerebellum is intact, if you lose this part of the brain called the subcortical midbrain, then you can result in locked-in syndrome. And this bottom figure is the image of the brain in terms of strength of the metabolism, measured by the positron emission tomography. And it seems to show that it's a highly active brain, but with a very low level of the activation in the subcortical areas. And the more sort of the serious comparison is here. Fully conscious patients versus locked-in syndrome patients have a difference around here, around here. So this is a sort of the slightly deactivated parts of the subcortical areas, but mostly in terms of the cortical activation or metabolism, it's mostly the same. And slightly there's a decrease in the parietal areas that may be related to this, movability of the body. And then compared to these locked-in syndrome patients, the so-called vegetative state patients do not have an active, brain, like here. And minimally conscious states subjects who were able to modulate the, brain response in response to the request for the voluntary imagery of the walking around or playing tennis that I talked about in week 1 and 2, they have a much better overall brain metabolism, as you see here, compared to this. But compared to the locked-in syndrome, it's much weaker. And minimally conscious state patients tend to have a conscious state only like in a fluctuating manner. So sometimes they can do it, sometimes they cannot do that imagery response. And again, this parietal areas are weaker, which is almost like quite non-active in the case of the vegetative state patients. So this is the imagery-based check of the whether people are conscious or not, as you might remember. And here, one of the critical question was about activation of the parietal areas around here, which patient was able to activate. This is a important follow-up experiment after that Owen's initial report that there exists some vegetative patients who are potentially misdiagnosed from the minimally conscious state. So this 2011 paper looked at the supposedly vegetative patients, and out of 54, 5 of them seems to be able to activate these areas according to whether they are asked to play imagine playing tennis or walking around the building. And this is, for example, quite striking pattern of the brain activation, where this is cephalic or sort of a hydrocephalic component of the brain, where because of the injury, parts of the brain start to kind of bleed the cerebral spinal fluid. It's like a water. And then because of the pressure, many parts of the brain gets pushed or damaged and then missing in the end. And still, this particular person was able to generate quite robust activation depending on the imagery instruction. And I will come back to this at the end of this today's lecture. All right. So I just wanted to emphasize the fact that this vegetative patient imagery paradigm is not something that is universally detects the consciousness. And out of 5 only, 54 vegetative patients, they were able to do this. And so there is some kind of issue in terms of sensitivity, even if the patient seems to be able to, it seems to be experiencing consciousness, this test may not be sufficiently sensitive to detect all of them in a reliable manner. Okay. So in summary of this second part, I'll just go quickly. Consequences of the brain damage on consciousness are difficult to imagine, but movies or novels can virtually make you experience what it's like to be a patient, and a conscious experience of a patient can dissociate from externally observable behaviors. And the brain mechanism of locked-in syndrome and other syndromes are being studied extensively, still ongoing. with that, I'll have a 5-minute break.